force. And I think today's conversation, and hopefully you'll get up and grab the mics, we'll be able to do something and go back to our departments and make a difference, save a life, keep officers safe. But I'd be remiss if I didn't thank a special person in the room. At IACP, we have so many intelligent people working every day, data mining, getting information together. And Tracy Phillips, I know you're there somewhere and you're probably hiding now, cringing. Thank you so much for what you did on this project. At this time, yeah. I'm going to turn it over to Mike here to my left to go through some of the people on the panel. But thank you, everybody who participated in this, thank you so much. And the task force itself, thank you for what you gave in. Bye.
Thank you, President DeLuca, and thank you for being the driving force behind this task force that we're going to report out on and have a discussion today about. So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the workshop entitled Officer Ambushes, Understanding These and Other Violent Acts Against the Police. I'm Mike Prado, a visiting fellow with the IACP, assigned to Homeland Security Investigations out of Washington, D.C., and we have a lot of ground to cover today, so I'm going to be very brief in introducing our distinguished panel. There are bios in the program if you want to learn more about each of these very remarkable individuals up here who've contributed to this task force. First, Chief Rick Smith of the Wakefield, Massachusetts Police Department and chair of the IACP Task Force to address global violence against police. He's joined by Lieutenant Michael Snyder of the Prince George's County, Maryland Police Department and also a fellow, or IACP visiting fellow. Dr. Robin Engel from the University of Cincinnati, and Jeff Kroger from the FBI's Office of Partner Engagement. As I mentioned, bios for all panelists can be found on the IACP conference app. Without further ado, because we are limited in time, we're going to jump right into it. I will turn the floor over to Chief Smith.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you, President DeLuca, for the opportunity to be here today. This is what happens when you step out of the room and go to the men's room, you come back, you find yourself, you have a new job. So, lesson learned. Anyway, violence against police, as we all know, is an ongoing concern for all of us. From our line officers to the chief, we want to ensure the safety and welfare of all of our fellow officers and all of the officers that work within our agencies. Earlier this summer, 6 officers were shot in the same night in 3 different cities, in Florida and in Pennsylvania, leaving 2 of our officers dead. In July, an NYPD officer was ambushed while sitting in a mobile command post. In September, a Polk County, Georgia detective was ambushed as she responded to reports of a stolen vehicle. So far in 2017, more than 100 law enforcement officers have died in the performance of their duty. More than 30 of them have been killed by gunfire. Equally troubling are the violent acts against police officers that do not result in death. These acts occur with shocking frequency. The FBI's FLIOCA program has reported that over 50,000 officers were feloniously assaulted during the year 2015. With that, nearly 1/3 of them sustained injuries. On average, that equates to more than 100 officers are assaulted each and every day. Violence against police occurs in big cities and small towns across the globe. From the knife-wielding attack in Buckingham Palace to a vehicular assault in Goose Creek, South Carolina, our officers face potential danger every time they step out on patrol. While there are no easy solutions, the IACP is doing what it can to provide police leaders and managers with resources to help safeguard our officers. Earlier this year, following a series of violent, unprovoked attacks against police, IACP President Don DeLuca set up a task force of committed law enforcement officers and executives to explore the issue of violence against police and to make concrete recommendations on how we can prevent further tragedies. Let me take a moment to recognize the members of the task force. For those of you who are present here today, please stand and wave when I call your name. Diane Bernhard, Executive Director, Concerns for Police Survivors. Jamie Cook, Executive Director, Arkansas Law Enforcement Training Academy. Darrell D'Souza, Deputy Commissioner, Baltimore City Police Department. Dr. Robin Engel, Vice President for Safety and Reform, University of Cincinnati. Wayne German, Chief of Police, Cedar Rapids, Iowa Police Department. Joe Kissel, Chief of Police, retired, Franklin Borough, New Jersey Police Department. Tim Lowry, Chief of Police, Florissant, Missouri Police Department. Brad Schimmel, Attorney General, Wisconsin Department of Justice. Doug Scott, Chief of Police, retired, Arlington County, Virginia Police Department. Kerry Sleeper, Assistant Director, Office of Partner Engagement, FBI. Stan Enbridge, Chief of Police, Abilene, Texas Police Department. Bo Thurnauer, Deputy Chief, East Hartford, Connecticut Police Department. David Zach, Chief of Police, Cheektowaga, New York Police Department. Thank you all for your service. I must say that everyone contributed greatly to where we are today, and I'm grateful for that, and thank you. The IACP Task Force to address global violence against police convened in January and then hosted a series of focus groups with line officers, mid-rank officers, and most importantly, the community to gain an insight and perspective on this issue. Lieutenant Snyder will share summaries of these meetings during today's panel, but the results are sobering. Our officers are greatly concerned, and they should be, and rightly so. As the most visible and accessible representatives of government, police today frequently and sadly are targets of attack. The results echo findings from a Pew Research Center report released in January, which found more than 93% of officers surveyed have become concerned about their safety. Our officers need to know that we support them and we have full faith and confidence in their ability to fairly and equitably police our communities. I challenge each of you to take a moment and evaluate the ways in which you and the other leaders of your department provide support to your officers, both in words and in action. To help with this self-evaluation process, we are releasing an updated publication at the conference entitled Preventing Line of Duty Deaths, A Chief's Duty. This agency self-assessment tool will help outline the host of internal and external officer safety considerations, allowing law enforcement leaders to proactively evaluate their own efforts and identify areas in which we can improve. IACP is committed to honoring fallen law enforcement officers while also raising awareness about the line of duty deaths through analysis and related trends and causes. To that end, we worked with the Officer Down Memorial page to revise our monthly line of duty death report. We also worked with our partners at the University of Cincinnati to analyze officer ambush incidents over the past year. These results will be presented today as well. While there is no panacea to violence against police, we hope that these resources will be valuable in raising awareness among chiefs and our officers. As with all IACP projects, we welcome member feedback, and the rest of the task force members are going to be happy and will be happy to receive any comments, suggestions, on how the association can better help safeguard our officers who go out to work every day. I'll now turn it over to Lieutenant Snyder, who will provide an overview of the focus group, the results, and the other outputs from the task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Smith, and thank you, Chief DeLuca, for having me at IACP and all the projects that you allowed me to be involved in. When the task force was first convened in January, there was no easy or obvious answers to the complexities against violence against law enforcement. However, the group quickly noted that there were perspectives missing from the room. We sat around, it was a room of chiefs, and you heard who was on the task force, that the line officers were not present. The people who were out patrolling our streets every day and putting their lives on the line, we didn't have their perspective. The mid-rank officers, the sergeants and the lieutenants who were out there and supervise and mentor these officers, the FTOs, and the community members whom we interact with on a daily basis. None of those perspectives were there, so some of us felt that we're sitting at the 30,000-foot level and didn't know what was going on. In response, ICP hosted a series of focus groups with each of these stakeholders. The results were interesting and informative. I'll share some of the takeaways today and encourage you to read the summaries posted to the IACP blog. As we got each one of those, sort of cleaned it up a little bit, we sent it out to a blog series so we would keep updating rather than all of a sudden come in today at conference and dump everything on you. We brought each of these in from the Metro, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia area just because of the strategic place of where the headquarters is located. Comments from the midline level officers and focus group suggested a frustrated but steadfast and committed workforce. Officers certainly sensed that violence against law enforcement is increasing. Offenders seem increasingly embodied. The lack of respect for police and living without fear of consequences. We see that every day in the news of what's going on. Related, officers were particularly frustrated with the justice system at large as perceived the inability, those that we do arrest, to keep them incarcerated. Violent offenders keep coming out. Community members felt the same way on this, that they see the people that they're calling to report on are frequently back out on the street within minutes. Department support was another key raised by officers. As Chief Smith mentioned in his comments, officers need to know that leadership supports them and has confidence in them and their abilities. And sometimes that wasn't always evident whenever we had the line, especially with the line officers. They felt that their leadership wasn't confident in them. They felt that their leadership sometimes didn't support them. It was embodying to have them in the room and hear the words that were coming out of their mouths. Investment in patrol was another interesting and area overlap between officers and community members. The community focus group noted that virtues of community policing, the officer-friendly program, the police athletic league program, and knowing the person who officers patrolling in a neighborhood and how the relationships used to be, how they would walk up to them, are quickly going away. Community members expressed frustration of reassignment of personnel. They understood the role of promotion and career development, but they also understood that departments should maybe come up with some kind of plan to have that person in that career who wants to be out there, who wants to be on patrol, but yet feels that they need to advance to have a better living for their families and be able to make more money. Related, officers noted the concern for patrol divisions are not supported in a manner that's commensurate with their role, particularly with regard to training. Patrol was often viewed as the first rung of an officer's career ladder, commonly staffed with the least experienced people, the people who were in special units who didn't quite cut it or got in trouble. Where's the first place we send them as leaders? We send them back to patrol. He's not cutting it here. He or she can go back to patrol. Potential solutions include increasing incentives for those who remain on patrol and for those who want to stay within a particular neighborhood. Officers were also eager for training, specifically scenario-based training, which we all know costs time and money that was so precious today. Critical incident reviews to learn from past experiences. A lot of those we thought were, people think that someone's tried a Monday morning quarterback it, when no, we're trying to learn from real-world incidents and what happens and how we can do things better. Things commonly learned in the academy are never touched again, such as understanding laws and the application of them, as well as defensive tactics. Officers get out and they don't want to do either one of them. I know the law, I deal with it every day. I know defensive tactics, I'm good with it every day. Another key point was hesitancy. We found in each one of the groups that officers are hesitant to act and they don't want to be the next YouTube video. They don't want to be on the 6 o'clock news. So frequently they're hesitant to act, and that causes the perpetrator or the person to feel more embodied, and then something that if they had done a simple come along, a simple escort technique, ends in the violence and the all-out fight. The task force produced a couple of items to speak to the officers' need for these training resources. First, IACP partnered with the Officer Down Memorial page to revise the line of duties death, as Chief Smith said, which is distributed to members each month. IACP newsletter and IACP and ODMP are committed to honoring fallen law enforcement officers while also raising awareness. A lot of times people think that, oh, it's just for the fallen. We have to learn from what happened, how those officers died or how those officers were injured. To that end, this report is suitable for roll call display and discussion, and now it features a reader-friendly infographic, concise summaries of each incident that are grouped by cause. So if you see a particular incidents that are starting to be trend in your jurisdiction, this is a resource for you to go and see what others are doing. Second, a new IACP training key entitled Officer Safety and Violence Against the Police has been published. This is in the back if you haven't had it, or it's also available on the IACP website. And if we happen to run out, we have more at the Hub and IACP Central for you. The training key covers officer safety considerations for situations that most frequently result in felonious deaths. We couldn't cover everything. If we had covered everything, we would have a book and no one would go to it. It covers ambushes. Ambushes are up. Multiple ambushes are up, as we saw with the incidents in Texas. Motor vehicle stops, arrests, executing search warrant, domestic violence calls. It's staggering in working with some of the people at IACP that people who are involved in domestic violence calls and involved in strangulation are have so much more tendency to have violence against law enforcement. To that end, there's a video in the back. It's a roll call video broken up into 3 segments, the third of which deals directly with violence against law enforcement. It's a great tool. Once again, if it's not in the back, we'll have more at IACP Hub and at IACP Central. Responding to persons affected by mental illness. IACP has the One Mind campaign. If you're not familiar with that, please look it up and become familiar. It's going to help you. The training key can be easily adapted for in-service or a series of roll call briefings. We have finally one resource that Chief Smith already mentioned is the line of duty deaths, a chief's duty. It provides a comprehensive key regarding to officer safety and wellness, not exclusive to targeted violence, but it gives you an idea of some places to start. The tool will evaluate officer safety interventions throughout their departments. It discusses such things, if anyone has it here, as equipment. You know, is your equipment up to date? Are we putting people in cars and things that are out of date? Our health and wellness, very big key. Our officer management and our training and tactics. Community partnerships, as well as on the back, it has, staggering stats and that go along with these. Speaking of stats, and I will bring up Dr. Engel, who will discuss more statistical output and some of the things that she's found, and it's going to be staggering. Dr. Engel.
Good afternoon. I'm going to take just a moment to pull up my slides here. So I'm Robin Engel. I'm with the University of Cincinnati, but more importantly here for the conference, I'm the director of IACP's new research center for police research and policy. And we've been asked to help with this task force to sort of put this issue in context. And so I want to begin with more of a personal message, and that is, I'm here today to speak about the statistics and to lay out for you what the trends and patterns look like over time. And when I do that, sometimes it feels cold and technical, and sometimes your eyes might glaze over, but I caution you to remember that every single one of these numbers is somebody's wife, somebody's husband, somebody's mother, somebody's father. And so while it seems clinical and cold, and I have to do that for part of my job, I recognize that this means something very, very different for the folks in this room. So with that, let's start with where we can gather information about violence against law enforcement. And there are just a handful of data sources that are available. The LEOCA data source, that's law enforcement officers killed in action. That's collected by the FBI and the UCR, and it includes officers killed or assaulted. But the information in it is more specific for those where there's a fatality. But when an officer is assaulted, we don't have as much specific information included in that particular data source. We also have the Officer Down Memorial page. This is an open source data. It's run by a nonprofit organization. And then we have the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund that also provides from a nonprofit organization a count of law enforcement that are killed in the line of duty. But there are discrepancies across and among these data sources, and that is due to the different reporting standards, how we define what an officer is, and various inclusion criteria. And so when we start to look at these discrepancies, let me give you an example from 2013. This was actually one of the safest years for law enforcement on record. But when you take a look at these different data sources, you find really different information that's coming forward. So the Officer Down Memorial page, for instance, reports 127 deaths in the line of duty. Compare that to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund that had 113 deaths. And again, it depends on how you classify, what you're counting, what types of officers you're looking at. And of course, the FBI reported something different as well. So what I'm going to be doing for you today is preparing for you data from LEOCA. So I'm looking very specifically at the law enforcement officers killed in action, knowing that these data may not match other data that's out there. And I'm going to talk to you about all assaults with injury, including officer killings. These data have been compiled from 1990 through current, and the 2016 data was actually just released on Monday. And what I'll be speaking to you about includes all reports for all types of officers and also includes U.S. territories. The first thing I'll draw your attention to with this graph, this is assaults with injury, including killings, against U.S. law enforcement officers, again, from 1990 to 2016. And I think you can see with this graph, when we put things in context, it's, I know, easy for me to say that this is really the safest time in history for law enforcement. It may not feel that way. But when you look at it historically and looking at the assaults with injuries, including death, back in the 1990s, it was a particularly violent time for law enforcement in this country. And what we saw through the 2000s was a decline in violence against police. And then moving into more recently, and I want to focus on that more recently, let's take a look at the last 10 years. What's been happening in our society? And here, this is just a blow-up. This is just these last 10 years, and I'm sorry, I'm flipping pretty quickly, but this is the circled area here. And this just kind of gives it to you in perspective. So you can see here that in 2014, we had a dip, a lower number of assaults with injury. But then in 2015, we saw an uptick again. In 2016, we're approaching higher levels. 2011 was one of those safer times, and as I mentioned before, 2013 was a safer time relative to the entire, from 1990 on. And again, giving you back that same trend line and taking a look at it again, putting this in context, of these assaults with injury, less than 0.5% involve officer fatalities. But those fatalities obviously are very important and one of the things that we want to key in on and really take a quick look at. So our officer felonious killing statistics, taking this from 1990 to present, on average 37, almost 38 years old at the time of death for our officers. Average law enforcement experience of about 11 years. Most of these officers were killed with a firearm, and in fact, the average in the last 10 years, 93% were killed with a firearm. The vast majority of these officers are male, and this actually demonstrates that male officers are overrepresented in felonious killings compared to their overall representation. So female officers, I believe, nationwide are in the 10 to 12%, if those statistics are still accurate, but are not reflected here. And then you can see the racial breakdown as well. Now, that does correspond a little bit better with what our law enforcement population looks like. These felonious killings have varied over the years, and you can see on this particular graph how we have sort of this up and down. But I bring your attention again to the last 10 years and what's been happening here, where we see a spike in 2016 compared to the previous year, where we had 41 officers that were killed in the line of duty, 65 this year. I'm sorry, for 2016. When I refer to this year's data, I'm really referring to last year's data, of course, that was just released. When we take a look by situation, and this is a little bit of a busy chart, and I'm not sure if you can see it in the back, but I'll talk you through the important parts here. And the first thing to note is that ambushes, this is in the blue is the 1990s, that decade. In the red is the 2000s, and in green we have the 2010s so far for this decade. And what you can see here is different types of situations that are involved in the felonious killing of U.S. officers. That ambush, and you can see starting in the 2000s and continuing into the 2010s, seems to be a higher percentage of overall deaths compared to what was happening in the 1990s. We can also see very specifically that some other types of situations are less likely to involve officer deaths. So burglary in progress, for instance, in the 2010s has come significantly down. The same with disturbance calls and drug-related calls. We also see that suspicious activity seems to be moving upward, trending in the wrong direction here, and tactical situations also for officers that are assaulted and killed. So taking a look at these situations, I wanted to present this again in context. So take just the last 10 years, that's on the left, and compare that to what happened in 2016 on the right. And what you can see here is that the percent of felonious killings of law enforcement officers by ambush has increased compared to just these last 10 years. We also see that traffic-related killings in 2016 were significantly less than they had been in the previous time period. But it's really that ambush that we're most concerned about, in particular for today's talk, and want to drill down and better understand what's happening in these particular situations. The good news is that body armor is more likely to be used by our officers. These are officers who were feloniously killed with a gun from the 1990s moving forward. And what you see is that the percent of officers that are wearing their body armor has been increasing over time. What we don't know is the percent of officers that were not killed but were shot at, wounded, and whether or not they had their body armor. And one of the reasons we don't know that is because we don't collect that detailed information in a systematic way. So focusing now on the ambush attacks, there's no agreed upon definition for what we mean by ambush, but IACP uses the following definition looking at 4 factors: an element of surprise, concealment of the assailant, their intentions or their weapons, suddenness of attack, or the lack of provocation. And what we see when we look at ambushes, assaults, and killing by ambush, these trends take you again back to the 1990s. In the red line, this is an ambush where an assault occurred, and the blue line is where an actual death occurred by ambush. And what we see again in the 1990s, we were actually more likely to be attacked as a law enforcement profession by ambush, and we see that number sort of trending down into the 2000s, but of concern again, if you take a look at, and think about this as different segments in time, what's happening this last decade is that bounce back, more upward trend that we had seen in the 1990s. Now, we're not reaching those same numbers, but the trend is what's concerning here because we're moving in the wrong direction. Focusing just on this last decade, and pulling this together for you, you can see there's some up and down numbers here with our ambush assaults. But again, 270 that resulted in injury in 2016 with 20 deaths reported for 2016 by ambush. And again, that's a significant jump from what we've seen in 2014 and 2015. The types of weapon used during these ambush attacks has changed in the 2000s and 2010s. We see actually a larger percentage of our ambush attacks that are involving hands and feet as the weapon rather than firearms. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but the trend does seem to be pretty clear compared to the 1990s. But the 2000 and 2010 data is pretty consistent with the type of weapon used. And we also looked at when an ambush occurs, when there's an assault with injury, when is the officer alone? These are actually for killings, not just for injury. And what we see here is that the percent of officers that are alone is actually less than 40% of the time. So when we have multiple officers, we're still at increased risk for ambush situations. And of course, you folks all know this. You know this because you live this and you've been in agencies where this has occurred or you know someone. So a lot of times I'm not telling you something you don't already know, but when we put it in context, I think that's really the important piece here. So to summarize, what do we know about assaults against police that have resulted in injury? We've seen this steadily increasing since the low in 2011, an 8%, almost 9% increase compared to that low in 2011, and a 4% increase compared to the last 2 years. We also see with fatal assaults against police, less than 0.5% of these assaults in 2016 were fatalities. But we also know that 2016 was marked with 65 officers killed and 20 of them from ambush, and that was a significant increase from previous years. These ambush attacks have fluctuated greatly in the last decade compared to very stable and relatively low numbers just the decade before. So we, again, are seeing an increase here in the number of ambush attacks by about 32% in the last 2 years. But what are we missing? We're missing consistency across these data sources. That's our first problem. We're also missing the situational factors that provide context. We're missing detailed information on all forms of assaults and how these encounters progress. The order of suspect resistance to officer use of force during that encounter, and we're not systematically capturing this information. And why is that important? Because for our future directions, we need to have more reliable and detailed data regarding assaults on officers. It is only through analyzing these trends and really taking a look at that big picture that we can better understand what those emerging trends are and use this information to really guide comprehensive efforts to keep our officers safe. And I know we can all agree in this room that that is the most important thing that we need to be looking forward into the future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner at the FBI. I just always wanted to say that. I have a partner in the FBI. And Jeff is going to be speaking about an assailant's study that he did to give you more of a drill down into the details.
Thank you very much, Robin. And before we start, I wanted to say thank you to you, the IACP, and members of the panel for allowing us to be a part of this. As Robin indicated, I didn't write this. This was something that was done by the people, by the police officers in the field, as well as our staff at OPE, so they really deserve all the recognition for that. But again, before we begin and before we talk about what we did, I want to show a short video.
I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of being a slave. I'm afraid of living under tyranny. Go ahead, shoot me. You know, I'll be the first one to be shot. I don't care.
Do you need police, fire, or medical?
I'm a CCC, sir. He had the weapon. He shot.
How many people were shot?
2.
Are they down, sir?
Yeah, they were down there.
On the date of the incident, Jared Miller was 31. Amanda Miller, his wife, was 22. The go-to method of resolving conflict for him generally was violence.
I want to blow up whole countries, whole nations. I want to make everybody submit to one world order governance under my rule.
Jared Miller appeared to thrive on conspiracy theories.
Check this out. This is quite disturbing. It says drones. Are they watching you? Probably. I mean, they're already wiretapping your phones, watching your Facebook and everything. And they're probably watching this video of me right now. I don't care. Congrats.
He felt that the government was spraying chemicals in the air to damage the citizens of the United States.
Those of you that don't think chemtrails are real, I don't know if you know or not, but our government has fully admitted that they do that, and that it costs the taxpayers $5 billion a year.
He complained about gun laws, drug laws. He complained about the government.
It's illegal.
Excessively.
That is the courthouse. Monument to tyranny.
He felt that he was living in a police state with police powers really overreaching.
I'm pretty sure threatening to kill a naked, unarmed individual is something that would be frowned upon.
Amanda didn't enter the relationship with any apparent grievances. She never had any run-ins with the law. She didn't seem to care about the government one way or the other. The longer she was with Jared, the more she began to adopt his grievances.
What we may never know is if she genuinely felt those things herself, or if she was patterning herself after her husband.
We're on our way to Vegas, baby.
You know, the thing about Vegas in June is it's just beautiful. And that day was no exception. It was sunny, hot, gorgeous out.
Our two officers, Alan Beck and Igor Soldo, were just having a regular lunch break.
They had started coming over the radio asking for 2 George 1, which was Alan and Igor's call sign.
Copy. 2 George 1. Right. 2 George 1, control.
They're not answering the radio. That's when I started getting like cold chills because I knew something was wrong.
You need police, fire,
I'm a CC Pizza. Guy just got 2 calls.
A guy just
He had the weapon. He shot a cop. I have 2 police officers down. They've been shot. The suspects are on foot and they're heavily armed.
Okay, so they're walking in the direction of what? Towards Walmart.
I grabbed my rifle vest. We had no idea what was waiting for us inside of Walmart.
You know, we had the devil visit us that particular day.
So that's a very powerful video. Every time I watch it, it makes you think and you get a different perspective of things. And that was 2014. As you guys know, better than anybody, that trend has continued to climb. In 2016, after the ambush-style attacks on the 5 Dallas police officers, the FBI wanted to take a look at what was driving this. We wanted to look, and what we did was we took a look at the assailants and the assailants only. The whole purpose of that was to try to identify a commonality that we could look at, that we could pass on, that might give an indication to police officers when they go out and they encounter people. We looked at the 64 deaths of the 64 officers that were killed in 2016, and we analyzed 50 of them. The 3 that we did not were based off of juveniles, and 2 of the people were unknown. And we wanted to, again, focus it on from a safety standpoint. At no time, and what we were very careful about that we never did was focus on the action of the officers, but it was about the assailant. What we did as well, and how we did this, was not by us analyzing it. We wanted to hear from the officers that were directly involved in the departments that lost officers. And we went out and interviewed them. 13 of the officers' departments talked to us personally. The rest we did from open source data. And now I want to kind of go over some of the findings. And I hate to bore you guys a lot with data, but I think some of these are very important because it'll kind of draw to where we conclude with at the end of the study. Of the 50 incidents that we analyzed, 86% of the assailants had a prior criminal history. 60% had a history of drug use. And of those 60% with a history of drug use, 32% were under the influence at the time of the event. Now, apologize for going statistics under statistics, but 46% of those had an unknown toxicology. So it's very, very likely that a majority of those assailants, even more, were under the influence of some type of drug. 56% were known to law enforcement. One thing we found in several of the interviews we did, that some of the officers told us it was only a matter of time. We knew this guy was going to cause problems with us. He dealt with us before, but it was a matter of time before something like this happened. 44% had a known history of domestic violence. 32% were on probation or parole, and 26% had active warrants. That's relevant because in a couple of the ones we looked at, one of the individuals shouldn't have even been out on the streets. He should have been locked up, but he was let out of jail. 24% had known gang affiliations, and 18% were diagnosed with mental health issues. Now, that's a lot of different things that kind of cover a large area, but one thing that is common of those is those are all main priorities or challenges that are facing law enforcement today. Some of the main things that we've heard from you guys when we've talked to you and some of the other associations. So after looking at that and some of the interviews, we identified some of the commonalities that these assailants had in common. 28% had a desire to kill law enforcement. Those 28% in some capacity either expressed that through social media to their family, all the way to the point where it had been a hatred of law enforcement. Now, when you look at the ambush style attacks, of the 14 of those 50 incidents, 71% of those individuals had a prior criminal history, and 71% were under the influence of narcotics. So when it became a premeditated attack, those numbers and commonalities of the statistics went up even higher. One of the other main commonalities we found, because we wanted to try and keep this somewhat simple and short, was there was a very big concern for a loss of their freedom and going back to jail. In all of these events, the majority of them indicated that they were not going to return to jail, again, through most of the family and some of the comments that were made to the police officers that they've known. They had access to firearms, both were obtained legally and illegally, and several of the stolen weapons exchanged hands multiple times. What we wanted to look at as well as trying to identify this from when we started to even go further into this is what contributed to these factors. What were you as police officers telling us? And some of the same things that we found were some of the exact same things we heard today and that I think this panel found in these studies. One thing that did stand out was a lack of support from politicians and elected officials. Some people believe that may have emboldened some of these people. Officers and some of the people that we interviewed indicated that they're not so sure every one of these individuals would have acted like they had 3 years ago, 5 years ago, but they believe that the perception that's been placed in law enforcement has contributed to this trend. Traditional and social media portrays a single narrative of immediate guilt of the officer. Sometimes we've heard a lot that we are so careful, law enforcement is so careful not to get too far out in front of it and not to put a message out without finishing an investigation that they get behind the 8 ball. And before you know it, media has already made a statement that has become, whether it's true or false, has become the narrative and the reality of the situation. You've seen this as much because some of these cases, before they're even investigated or the crime scene is secure, has already been placed out on your social media and your traditional media sources. Excuse me. Another thing that was touched on earlier, and we heard this a lot when we were out in the field, was the turnstile justice system. Less prosecutions, especially for nonviolent drug offenders, has put these criminals back on the street very quickly. It was very much identical to what was mentioned earlier, that the people that are reporting on these individuals are seeing the same people coming back out on the streets. What we saw and what we understood from talking to you guys was that it almost gave that assailant a sense of beating the system. They basically thought that they know there was a lack of consequences for the majority of the crimes that they were going to commit, and you couple all of that with the perception that's been changed with police and the more emboldened approach, and they're more likely to resist. One thing, again, that we saw kind of going back to that was that police in the social norm of policing right now in society, it was almost like some people told us it was accepted to resist the police. It was almost become norm in this day and age that you could resist or not comply. One example we were given was that a police officer indicated that 5 years ago they would either run or comply. Now they'll just resist and almost encourage you to act to them. Leading into all of these, we wanted to find out what were the effects of policing. What has that led to? And again, I feel like I was the last one to go, so I'm kind of repeating some of the same things that were said by this committee. But what we saw and heard was there was an intense scrutiny and criticism of law enforcement that had adverse effects from the current state of policing. Officers have become scared and demoralized. Not scared to do the job, but scared for exactly like they indicated that they were going to be the next YouTube video. We've heard examples where police officers have had their loved ones say, do not get on CNN. Do not. Walk away if you have to. Now, I don't think that's happening. One of the main things I was talking to Mike before we started this is that it seems like in the past 2 years, we've focused on a lot of negative things, whether it was the increase of violent crime and homicides or this study. But one thing that was unequivocally clear is the the resolve of police officers has not changed one bit. Every one of these individuals, everybody that we talked to, were so committed to the job that that was something that was very proud that came out of this. So I always want to put that in there because when you talk about stuff like this, you don't want to sit there and say, well, that's how policing has become. No, that's not the case at all. I think that it is still one of the most committed professions, and that was one thing we constantly heard. But going back to that, though, I'm not sure, but there was one, if you've ever read the incident, but there was one officer who actually indicated she was beaten, slammed, and attacked. And when asked by her superiors, why didn't you react? Why didn't you use deadly force? She said she was afraid of the backlash from the community. She was afraid of what her family would go through if she shot somebody. So she chose not to act and very well could have gotten killed that night. Some of the things that have been told, again, were the conscious decision to maybe not be as proactive with some of the policing. And then, again, the defiance towards police officers that I mentioned. People, again, have found that they will go ahead and take on a police officer because they usually think that they're going to be believed over over the norm of the investigation. So in conclusion to this, one thing that we did look at when we started this is we were going to look and analyze a lot of data. Are we going to be able to find one thing? I can stand here and tell you right now we didn't find one thing. I would have loved to have come to the conclusion of this study and said, you know what, every time you come across this individual with these characteristics, he's more likely going to attack police and be on the lookout so it'll make you safer. That was our goal, but we didn't. We found that there was many factors that contributed to all of these events in different styles, and each one of them combined led to what we found, whether it was drugs, criminal history, mental health, or the perception of police. All of these played a role in the individuals that were willing to attack police in this study. And going forward, we really got positive feedback on this study. If you haven't seen it, it's on our website. It's titled The Assailant Study. I encourage you guys to read it, but read it more from the standpoint of come back to us and tell us what we can do better. We've already started the 2017 study. Unfortunately, I wish we weren't doing it, but it's right in line right now with what happened in 2016. To date, 42 officers have been killed in an adversarial engagement. 39 by gunfire, 2 by assault, and 1 by a stabbing. So we are starting the same project, but we want to look at it from a different perspective. So I encourage you that if you do see something that we could do better, or you think that there'd be a better way to approach this, please email us. It's on our website, the FBI Office of Partner Engagement, and we take that very seriously. This was one of the best products that I think our team ever did, and we were very proud that we got some very positive feedback from you guys. In conclusion, and last, I just want to acknowledge the people that allowed us to go out and talk to them and talk about these events. It wasn't easy, but they really, really, I think, gave us that perspective that we needed because like I always say this when we talk out, there's nothing that we can tell you from FBI or in Washington that you already know, or that you don't know better than us. So by hearing it from you guys, we were able to truly understand what is going on the front lines. So in that, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff. We're not quite done yet. We want to open this up to a question and answer period, but before we do that, we would like to share, IACP would like to share 2 related officer safety projects that we're involved in. I'm going to call on a couple people in the crowd that are involved in those projects if they're here. First is the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. Sergeant Chris Scallon, an IACP visiting fellow from Norfolk, Virginia, can very briefly address that issue. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
How you doing? Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys. My name is Sergeant Chris Gallen. I'm with the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit Project, which is a virtual online toolkit addressing all things for trauma exposure. In listening to the last speaker, I apologize, I had to come in from another room. There's a sense of dread that comes along with being a police officer, being in law enforcement or public safety. That manifests itself, that emotional response manifests itself physiologically, but it also does emotionally damage. And there's only so much you can be hypervigilant without it starting to affect you. So that's where the toolkit comes in. We didn't reinvent the wheel, we just pulled from a compendium of resources from around the country, the best emerging practices on how to handle these situations. You know, we handle the shootings, we respond to those because those are big incidents. But how do you address the officer who's been seeing all this stuff on the news, and time after time again, they're just waiting for their call, their time when it's them. That anticipation is just as traumatic as an incident itself. So I would encourage you to look on through the IACP website, the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit Project, and hopefully we can prepare for something, unfortunately, that will be inevitable. Again, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. We also have, we're also a partner in the Near Miss database, an effort to track and study the close calls in policing that could have resulted in a serious injury or fatality but did not. Brett Cowell, project associate with Police Foundation, can you please give us a quick overview of that?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Brett Cowell, I work with the Police Foundation. One of the projects that I've been working on for the past 2 years is LEO Near Miss, Law Enforcement Officer Near Miss. And IACP is actually partnering with us along with the Officer Down Memorial Page, the National Officer Memorial Fund, Major City Chiefs, and some other organizations. And basically what this is we're trying to capture the near misses that officers experience. And near misses to us are any incident where an officer was almost seriously injured or killed but was not. And so every year we do a good job of tracking the line of duty deaths, but we are not capturing systematically, as Robin was kind of indicating, we're not capturing some of these other incidents that officers are getting involved in. And we really need to start capturing these near misses, because we've learned in other industries that there are literally hundreds of near misses for every serious injury or fatality. So, I mean, in these close calls, officers, I think all officers are going to have a few close calls in their career, but they're often shared with officers on their shift or in their department, but they're rarely shared with officers across the country. And so we need to be sharing these incidents, these near misses, and sharing the lessons learned from them to improve the safety of officers, you know, outside of our department. So if you guys want to visit us at booth 2004 to talk a little bit more, I'll also be in the back of the room if you want to ask any questions. But it's LEO Near Miss. It's available on the website, and it's also on a mobile app. It's completely free. Thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Chris. Both very important projects. Now is the time that we would like to open up the floor to the audience. Should you have any questions, we encourage any questions you may have for members of the panel regarding this extremely important topic. Yes, sir. And there's a microphone back there if you'd like to be heard louder. Okay, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, should I start again? The question was, from the 1970s, did we see something different related to Black Panthers and probably a potential increase in ambush deaths? And what I was mentioning was that the data that we were able to access was from 1990 forward, and we just didn't systematically collect with the same type of definition of what is an ambush and that type of information. But I was speculating, especially given the higher numbers of assaults against police and ambushes in the 1990s that we saw, that was likely a continuing trend from prior decades. But it would be speculative for me to say.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Just a couple of questions. Were there any takeaways tactically that this panel came up with that the officers could have done? I remember videos, officer safety videos from the 90s as it related to officers' response to these kind of events. And the second question is, did you look at the role of 911 call takers as it relates to information that they may have been privy to that could have been passed along to officers to make them aware of potential ambush situations? Thank you.
Thank you. What we did with the training key is we tried to give you a sense of not dumbing it down to the academy level, but putting it back to officers need to remain vigilant wherever they are, specifically speaking to the ambush piece, and to try to remind officers where they're sitting in restaurants, that, you know, what to do when you're pulling up at a traffic light, things of that nature, that every potential situation could be an ambush, but we don't want to walk around to the point where we're on, you know, everything to the point where the citizen then comes up and asks me for directions and all of a sudden I overreact. To your other point about the dispatchers, we had not really addressed that fact. We're doing that in other projects with our active shooter project, and talking to dispatchers about information where it comes out with that. But in this project, we really had not addressed anything with dispatchers.
I'd just like to follow up on that a little bit. We all know complacency is a killer in this business, and all of our officers. In fact, command officers as well as chiefs become complacent. But a big piece of this, and we've talked about it, and I'm sure you've heard about it, the 21st century policing model that the IACP has put out, a big piece of this, aside from the tactical operations side, is the fact that through legitimacy and trust in your community, and that's why it was so important that we bring the community in when we talked, when managers, line officers, and middle managers had the opportunity to share this with the community. Building that trust, building that openness and within your community is huge. So when you take that and you couple that side of the house, if you will, with the tactical side, it provides for at least a perception of a very, or a safer community for your officers. And we have to continue to train our officers to think like this. Yes, like the lieutenant said, we can't go into every situation as a warrior, but at the same time, we have to have them thinking in the back of their head that this could very likely be an event like that. So it's so important to have the partner engagement, and have that partner engagement be the community.
Thanks, Chief. We only have about a minute left, and we realize that, you know, trying to drill this down all into just, you know, a 1-hour session is a very difficult task. What we aim to do, and we hope we accomplished, is at least show you the efforts of the task force, introduce you to those materials that are available, and really just reiterate how the safety of your officers and the safety of our colleagues and our peers that we work with every day is the preeminent responsibility of all of us, and really seeing things through that prism, specifically in today's environment. So with that, we do thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention.